recorded. We will not record, your faces are not recorded, only my face is being recorded. But if you ask a question, your voice will be recorded. So you'll be adjacent to history in more than one sense. So my name is Valentin Komarovskiy. I go by Val. So tonight is October 4th, 2021, and we're here at Northeastern University. And today we'll talk about artificial intelligence, we'll talk about blockchain and how they intersect and relate, and we will talk a bit about Cardano and DAO, and Cardano as a DAO, as a decentralized autonomous organization. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I went to Northeastern twice. I have an undergrad from Northeastern in MIS, Management Information Systems, and I also have an MBA from the Northeastern High-Tech MBA program. So I got my MBA here in 2009, so it's been a few years since I graduated from that program, but it was fun, and I always like coming back here, and I like talking to students and bring new information. I like interactive sessions where you can ask questions and you can maybe challenge me and my knowledge at some point. So I have about 30 slides that I'll go through. Please feel free to ask questions or comment at any time. It's certainly welcome. So to break the ice a little bit, I'll have you choose one of these 4 answers here. So there are 3 things that actually happened to me and 1 thing that didn't happen, and that's a lie. So 1 through 4. I'm banned from Italy for non-payment of a parking ticket. I was stopped by Romanian border patrol for trying to cross the border illegally. I'm no longer allowed to visit my doctor because of multiple missed appointments and no-shows. And Canadian mounted police took apart my rental car because of suspicion of drug trafficking. So which one is not true? Wow, you guessed that one really fast. Okay, yes, so that one is not true, but the rest of them are true. Okay, so that's a good breaker. So I wanted to start by talking a little about the internet. We have a multi-generational internet. In the 80s, when the internet just started, it was focused around human-to-human communication. I work in the internet industry. I work in the security consulting space, and I have a approximately 20-year career in this space. So I don't go back that far. I don't go back in the 80s. I was born in the 80s, but in the 80s, the internet was about human-to-human contact. So when email got started in the 80s, you would send somebody an email, and then you would wait for hours, not days or weeks, the way that you would with a snail mail, and then they would write back to you. So in the next generation, the internet of content in the 90s, it was about information, entertainment, and this was very new. We still paid hundreds of dollars for telephone communications in those days in the 90s, in the early and mid 90s. So being able to get information instead of the newspapers, get them on the web, it was faster, news traveled faster. You could talk to a person on a messenger. That was the second generation. The third generation was the internet of services, productivity, e-commerce. It was late 90s, early 2000s. And this is where eBay and Amazon started, and they got a foothold in the market. You could really see the difference in the e-productivity and e-commerce. And in the 2010s, it was all about social media: Skype, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. So it was interacting with others and interacting with content. And in the current generation, it's Internet of Things, it's machine-to-machine communication, online payments, automation, actuation, and input-output on the internet. You provide some input to the system, it provides you with output, and this is where we are today. So if you go back to the 90s, there was the Terminator Judgment Day. Does anybody remember that movie? Yeah, so I really liked it. That's one of the Schwarzenegger's biggest hits. Here's a Gray Scott on the Terminator. If you have to talk about the Terminator, if you're talking about the artificial intelligence, I actually think that that's way off. I don't think that an artificial intelligence system that has superhuman intelligence will be violent. I do think that it will disrupt our culture. So what he's talking about is that in Judgment Day, the plot of the movie is that Skynet takes over a nuclear missiles and launches them against humans. And the good characters in the movie are trying to stop that. So that's one way that artificial intelligence could affect our lives. But we certainly hope that it can affect our lives in a better way. It can disrupt our culture and help us solve age-old problems like cure diseases that are currently uncurable, find life on other planets, and help lift third world countries out of poverty. So those are the problems that we hope that artificial intelligence will help us solve. So what is artificial intelligence? What are your thoughts on that? Who can tell me what it is? How is that different from basic algorithm or computer code?
AI is basically a machine that is programmed to perform a task that is difficult for.
Okay, perform a task that's difficult for a human. Any other suggestions? Any other ideas, thoughts? A machine that acts like a human being. Okay, I like that. What about thoughts? What's a thought? Can machines think? They cannot think. Okay. What about a blockchain? What's a blockchain? Is that different from artificial intelligence? Is it related? Okay, it's related. So blockchain is a distributed ledger, right? It's related, but it's not exactly the same thing. So let's see what the answers are. So artificial intelligence, according to Russell and Norvig, who wrote the book on the subject, is study of agents that receive percepts from the environment. So they received some inputs from whatever is going on in the environment, and they perform actions. So these are some kind of intelligence actions that are based on real life events. And thoughts are encompasses of flows of ideas that are associated and that can lead logical conclusions and actions. Blockchain is a digital ledger of transactions that are duplicated and distributed. And that's different from artificial intelligence, and is different from algorithm, because algorithm is a finite sequence of well-defined and computer implemented instructions. So an algorithm is a set of instructions. Blockchain is a ledger where some information can be recorded and is decentralized. And an artificial intelligence is a machine that can maybe act like humans act, or it can take an information and perform actions on that information and those inputs, right? So how do these relate? How do these concepts, how do they relate? So this is the Skynet, and in the plot of the movie, Skynet got control of the United States nuclear missiles, and it initiated a launch of nuclear missiles in the United States, and this is supposedly based in 1997. So back then in the early 90s, we thought that artificial intelligence was really close to us. It was only a few years away. And right now we're in the year of 2021, and maybe we think the same way. We still think that artificial intelligence is really close to us. It's only a few years away, right? So a few years,
4 years have gone by, but our perception of the artificial intelligence stayed the same. On the time scale, we still think that it's not quite here, but it's somewhere close, right? Does anyone disagree? Maybe we understand it a little bit better. So, what do we think about artificial intelligence, and what are some of the risks? So, when you talk to humans about artificial intelligence, one of the risks or one of their fears is that artificial intelligence will take away their jobs. They imagine some robot that lives in your house with you, and they do some mundane tasks, or maybe they work in a factory. The robot works in a factory, and the robot does some mundane tasks. Tesla just announced that they're working on a robot like that. Others think that artificial intelligence will take away your privacy. They'll be able to spy on your online activities or break encryption and take a hold of some information that's private to you, and therefore it's a privacy risk. Or that it's a deep fake. It could create some information and disseminate fake information through the internet or through your social media and create fake news, as they would call them, during the election cycles. Or that artificial intelligence would make some decisions that's based on bad data, just like in the Judgment Day movie. Skynet decided that humans were too dangerous for themselves, so Skynet had to kill humans in order to preserve the planet, right? Socioeconomic inequality. And artificial intelligence will be available only to the rich, or it will cause market fluctuations because it will use high frequency trading, and it will outthink humans in the markets, such as cryptocurrency markets, stock markets, and the weapons automation, like we mentioned about Skynet and taking over the nuclear silos and nuclear missiles. So these are some of the risks that people perceive. So blockchain is as a synergy, and we propose that blockchain can be a risk mitigator for some of those risks. So blockchain is an open source software. There is no trademark, there is no patent. There are some blockchains like Hedera Hashgraph that are trademarked, but we see blockchains like Cardano, Ethereum, Bitcoin. We see those as blockchains truly because they're open, and you can go in and you can audit the code. You can see what's in the code. It's available to anybody. They're decentralized, so they're not controlled by one person. There are, for instance, on the Cardano blockchain, there are now 3,000 stake pool operators who are transaction validators. So it's highly decentralized throughout the world. There's a programmable money that's enabled on the blockchains, and those are called cryptocurrencies. So that's with Bitcoin, that's BTC. With Cardano, it's ADA. With Ethereum, it's ETH. So that's the unit of account, and that's an exchange of value. And the blockchains are truth machines because they're immutable. Once a record is recorded based on a consensus algorithm, it cannot be reverted. You cannot go back and roll back transactions and go ahead.
So the records cannot be changed. You cannot go back and
while it is in the process of like someone has to verify the blockchain before it's committed, right?
So that's called the consensus algorithm. So the consensus is how it's a multi-party computation, multi-party recording of the block. So when there's one transaction validator that records a block, the block is completed, that's passed on through the network, and once there is enough nodes that record that change in the blockchain, then it's adapted on the blockchain as valid, right? If there's more than 51% of the transaction validators.
How do you define a node to be, perfect? Like you said, if a node is checked by someone and it is then transferred to other nodes, then
okay.
that
All right, so those are good questions. So When we say that the software is open source, so for instance, a blockchain, a Bitcoin node or a Cardano node runs on a software. So Cardano has its own block relay and certificate server server roles, and there is a software version that gets deployed. You can deploy it on Windows or Linux, and you have the opportunity to go and review the code, what's in the code of that node, right? But it doesn't have anything to do with writing data in the blocks, other than you have to be running a current version of the code, otherwise you can't produce blocks on the latest version. So for instance, we just had an Alonzo upgrade released 1.29 of the node, and that's a smart contract release, and in order for you to run, you have to run that version in order to be able to create blocks after a certain point, which was in September. So the openness of the system is in the software itself. It doesn't mean that anybody can go and write anything they want in the ledger. There has to, a consensus has to be reached that some record is valid and it should be written on the blockchain, but the version of the software is what the nodes run or the wallets run.
Verify that code is perfect or not, like if it is valid? Who verifies it?
Who verifies what?
Who verifies if the contract is correct and it is allowed to be passed through?
So there is a consensus mechanism, right? So
is it basically a software that checks everything up, or it's a set of humans and machine that checks?
So for smart contracts, there has to be conditions that are built into the smart contract for a smart contract to be recorded. So you, as a developer, you would be developing a smart contract and writing certain conditions into it, and in the conditions of the smart contract, you will state at what point it can go through a certain checkpoint, and at what point it's valid, at what point it can be recorded. So we'll go through that a little bit further on, but I hope that answers your question. So the transaction validators only validate if there is sufficient information to be recorded. It doesn't validate, if the information that you have provided is true. So, you can write something that is not necessarily true. It's not up to the transaction validators, it's not up to the blockchain to validate that information you're providing is true. We're only validating that the conditions were met to write that data into the ledger, or to write that information into the ledger.
So a little bit about the history of the internet. So I mentioned the different phases. In the 80s, it was human to human contact. So we communicated with others on the other side of the wire. In the 90s, it was don't talk to random people on the internet, and don't get in the cars with strangers. In the 2000s, bring back people from the 80s and 90s, whether we want to talk to them or not. So that's your social networking. In the 2010s, you'd be hiring random people from the internet and to do your chores. That's your Instacart. In the 2015, hail people from the internet and get into their cars. So that's Uber and Lyft. So the mentality is now changing. In 2017, some crazies from the internet are paying thousands of dollars for magical internet money, such as Bitcoin. So that's when you saw in 2017, Bitcoin went up to $20,000, and that was the time when a lot of people learned about its existence and started throwing money at it. In the 2020s, the internet became a window into our universe from the confines of our home. So that's the beginning of the COVID, and everybody's working from home. So that was our only kind of interface into the real world. And it's 2021, and the crazy internet money doesn't seem so crazy anymore, because anytime you turn on the TV, you hear on the news that the government is printing trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. So now the notion of what's real money and what's magical internet money is getting blurred a bit. This is from GMI, and it's the adoption curve of the internet versus the adoption curve of blockchain and cryptocurrency users. So if you look here, on top, the white lettering numbers from 92 to 2006, and this white line here, this is internet users. So we went from this would be 1 billion up here. So this would be 10 million here in 92. So we got to 1 billion internet users by 2006. And down here on the red lettering, 2016 is under 10 million cryptocurrency users. And right now we're here. So in 2021, we're roughly at 200 million, and we'll hit 1 billion by 2024 and 3.7 billion. So roughly half of the world population, we think, by 2030. So this is how the penetration of the use of the internet compares to the penetration and adoption of blockchain and cryptocurrency. So this is where we are right now. So we're still in the early stages. So now a little bit about Cardano as a DAO, and what is a DAO? So a DAO is distributed autonomous organization. It consists of multitude of components. One of the components is stake pool operators. So the stake pool operators on the Cardano platform are transaction validators. So we run servers on the internet that validate transactions, and that's our job. So we keep the network running by keeping our servers running. So I operate a stake pool that's called LEGA. That's the ticker, LEGA. So Cardano is a delegated proof of stake blockchain, and that's different from Bitcoin and Ethereum. Right now, Cardano is number 3 by market cap behind Bitcoin and Ethereum. So Bitcoin is proof of work. Ethereum right now is proof of work, but it's going to proof of stake. Cardano is proof of stake. ADA is the native currency of Cardano. Cardano is a financial operating system that we believe will power the next industrial evolution. I'll mention some of the economic drivers behind the value of ADA, and I'll go over that in a bit. But ADA has a finite supply, and it's powered by proof of stake, and it pays out rewards to the stakeholders, those who stake their ADA. We'll go over the smart contracts. Smart contracts just became available on Cardano in September. There's a governance component to Cardano, and it can help power artificial intelligence on the Cardano blockchain. So we'll go over that. And Cardano is a system of trust. Like other blockchains, it also tries to solve the Byzantine general problem and the third-party risk problem by eliminating third-party risk. It's an open platform that seeks to provide economic identity to billions who lack it by providing decentralized applications to manage identity, value, and governance. So that's the value statement of the Cardano blockchain and what it is. Cardano has an ecosystem of other projects and other organizations and companies that work with it, and it consists of liquidity providers, oracles into the legacy information world, NFT marketplaces and NFT creators, systems, insurance, synthetic assets, stablecoins, and borrowing platforms. So there's quite a large Cardano ecosystem. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself as a stake pool operator and my job. So we validate transactions on a Cardano blockchain. We run servers on the internet that process transactions, and we validate them. When they're validated, they're written into a block. A block contains a set amount of data and a set number of transactions. As stake operators, we do not have access to delegators' funds. We do not distribute rewards. So delegators hold their own funds. The blockchain distributes rewards. Stake operator does not decide who earns how much in rewards. And you do not send your ADA to stake operator. With a delegated proof of stake, each delegator holds their own ADA in their wallet. There is a mobile version of the wallet called Uroi. There is a desktop version of the wallet called Daedalus. So there are certain responsibilities we have, and there are certain responsibilities that delegators and the blockchain has. So there's a lot of automation that's built into it. So what makes something a currency, and why is it important to have a currency on a blockchain? Scarcity. Bitcoin has scarcity to it. It has a limited supply of 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be created. Right now, currently, there are approximately 20 million, just under 20 million Bitcoin in circulation. Cardano has a set limit of 45 billion ADA that will ever be in circulation. Currently, there are roughly 32 billion in circulation. Divisibility. Satoshi is 100 millionth of a Bitcoin, and Lovelace is 1 millionth of ADA. That's Cardano's cryptocurrency. Utility. There are new use cases created for Cardano every day, and Bitcoin is largely known as pristine collateral and store of value. Transportability. You can send ADA or Bitcoin around the world. You can send ADA in seconds. You can send Bitcoin in minutes. It's a bit slower, but it's a lot faster than sending money with MoneyGram or Western Union. Durability. Bitcoin and Cardano have never been broken. They will survive because they run on decentralized networks. You may have heard recently that China kicked out all the Bitcoin miners from their country, and the network hash rate lost about a quarter of its processing power, and the blockchain just kept going. So that's durability. It's difficulty in destroying it. Not to say that it can't be taken offline, but you would have to take down the internet to stop it. So if you take all cryptocurrencies, the current market cap is around 2 trillion. Bitcoin at 50,000 has a market cap of 1 trillion in USD terms. And it has dominance. So right now it's at 40-something% dominance in the market, meaning that 40% of all cryptocurrencies market cap is held by Bitcoin. And Bitcoin maximalists believe that Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency that will survive. And then there are others who believe that their project will survive and will be the best. So I personally don't think so. I think that we're moving towards the internet of value, and there will be multiple winners who will have their own niche use cases. I don't think that there's going to be just one project that will dominate. There are just too many applications, and there are too many use cases. So the main difference between Cardano and other blockchains is the consensus algorithm, and the difference between Cardano and Ethereum and Bitcoin. And I want to stress it that Cardano solved the proof of stake problem. And there are other blockchains that have also come close or solved this problem. So Cardano is not the only one. Algorand has done a really good job with their proof of stake. There are other proof of stake cryptocurrencies and blockchains out there. Ethereum was moving towards proof of stake. It's supposed to go from proof of work to proof of stake next year, but Cardano does a really good job with the proof of stake algorithm, and I will tell you why. So a little bit about the differences between proof of stake and proof of work. And I mention this because when I talk to people about cryptocurrencies and blockchains, everybody knows Bitcoin. So let's measure up Cardano against Bitcoin. With proof of work, the profitability of mining goes up as more electricity is used and more equipment is used. So when you add the ASCII miners to your Bitcoin mining farm, the more electricity you use and the more machines you use, the more Bitcoin you can produce. It doesn't mean that there will be more Bitcoins produced, but you as a producer will produce more Bitcoin. So you will still be competing with others, and there's still a finite amount of Bitcoin that will be produced. But by adding those resources, you'll be able to produce more. With proof of stake, profitability of mining goes up with the quantity of the asset that you have staked. So depending on how much ADA is staked in a pool, it increases participation in what's called the slottery. So it enables the stake pool to participate in the more lottery opportunities so that they have a chance to produce more blocks. The probability of minting a block on a proof of work mining platform is dependent on the amount of mining equipment that you put to work. Probability of mining with proof of stake is increased with the amount of ADA that is staked. So more ADA, more probability. In a proof of stake system, a 51% attack is very unlikely because you'd have to own more than 51% of the asset and have it staked in order to be able to rewrite the ledger and create like a double spend attack. With proof of work, there's a higher probability that an attacker could use more than 51% of the hashing power at any given time, and therefore create a double spend attack. So this never happened on the Bitcoin blockchain, but it did happen on Ethereum Classic and a few other ones where some miners were able to commit more resources to the blockchain, more than 51% at one time, thereby creating a double spend attack. Proof of stake is decentralized because mining and transaction processes are largely owned by small pool operators, small transaction validators. Proof of work mining is more centralized because those who produce Bitcoins, or those who make the mining machines, such as Bitmain, they're able to commit more resources to mining. So they mine more and they create more centralization. And now the environmental factor. You may have heard about this a lot, that there's a concern that Bitcoin is consuming more electricity than some small countries. And Tesla began accepting Bitcoin for payment sometime in February. And then in May, they said that they wouldn't accept it anymore because Bitcoin is not a clean blockchain and it uses a lot of electricity. So Cardano uses a fraction of the electricity because it doesn't rely on the machine power to produce the blocks. It relies on staked supply to produce the block. And those who have more ADA stake are able to produce more, not those who commit more electricity and equipment. So any questions on the differences between proof of stake and proof of work? Anybody on online? Any of our online people? Okay. So some of the concepts of delegated proof of stake and some of the terms that are useful to know. So ADA staking rewards. When you delegate to the blockchain, to Cardano blockchain, you have a right to ADA that comes from the newly minted supply. Those are called staking rewards. They come from ADA reserves. So 45 billion ADA will ever be minted. Right now, there's about 32 billion in circulation. So the remaining is the reserves. So every 5 days, there is an epoch turnover, and a portion of the reserves gets released as rewards to the delegators into the circulating supply. A delegator is anyone that owns ADA and stakes it. A stake pool is a transaction validator, and the stake pool operator is somebody who runs the servers to validate the transaction in a pool. So how do you get the blocks? So the blocks are records like a page in a ledger, and blocks are randomly assigned in the process that's called a slottery, based on the amount of ADA that you have staked in the pool. So traditional organizations, if we compare traditional organizations to DAOs, in traditional organizations such as corporations, government bodies, there is a hierarchy. So there's a CEO, senior management, middle management, junior management, supervisors, and staff. So if you go to most corporations in the world or most governments, they are organized like this. Top-down management. So some of the problems and inefficiencies of these organizations are long time in decision-making. People on top of the organizations, when some decision is made, it takes a while to propagate through the senior management, middle management, get to the people on the bottom. Sometimes even those who are on the bottom of the pyramid, they don't really understand why decisions are being made or the mission of the organization. There's a higher chance of a human error because humans make mistakes in decision making, and even when they perform redundant tasks, they're often not performed in the same way as before. So they can have errors. Corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse. If you remember Enron or any of the other Madoff or any of the other scandals that were around traditional organizations, people will not only make mistakes, which are unintentional, but they will intentionally commit fraud, waste, and abuse, trying to cut corners. So corruption, and corruption happens because people cut corners because they want to change the rules in their favor and because they want to maybe enrich themselves, and there is not enough visibility in their actions and their decision making to realize that this is happening when it's happening. We always go back and look at something that happened before, right? Message distortion. When somebody on top of the organization pushes a message down to their subordinates, it goes through multiple people, it goes through different communication sources, so they don't always get the message. And then lack of efficiency. The lessons that are learned in the past, often we don't take advantage of that knowledge. We don't pass on those lessons and knowledge obtained in those lessons and mistakes in the past to future projects, future decision making. So what knowledge we have learned often gets lost. So these are the problems and inefficiencies in the traditional organizations. Do you guys know of any other ones, or do you know of examples in your organizations, in your governments, if you come from another country, or if even in this country? Have you seen these type of inefficiencies?
You have, okay.
Dieselgate.
Dieselgate, yeah, Volkswagen. What did that cost them? How did that happen?
Yeah. Cost a lot, and our government is just.
billions of dollars that Volkswagen had to pay the governments, and they haven't even resolved this problem with some of the governments. The lawsuits keep going, and not only they had to pay the fines to the government, they had to give back cars to a lot of the owners. And what happened? Corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse. They triggered the computers in their cars to produce results when being tested for efficiency as if the computer was in test mode, right? So that's a problem, a very costly one.
So how does that compare to decentralized autonomous organizations? There is a machine consensus around the governance and around activities. So with the DAOs, there are certain rules that get created and they're written into the software. And there are certain conditions that are set in the rules. When those rules are met, actions are executed. So there is no centralized entity. There is no legal entity in many cases. There's nobody to go after. There's a validator of the events or transactions. There may be an exchange for an exchange of value if something needs to be paid for or somebody needs to be paid. There is a user and there's a developer. The developers, they write the code, they write the rules. When certain conditions are met, those rules are put in effect, and executions of the commands are ran in the software. So this is how the distributed network of autonomous stakeholders run decentralized autonomous organizations. It's a very different approach than the hierarchical approach. So here, there is no space for corruption. There is no ability for somebody to rewrite the rules in their favor. There is a concrete set of instructions that are being executed when conditions are met. What is a DAO? It's an organization that's represented by a set of rules, and those rules are encoded as a computer program. They're transparent. They're controlled by the organization members. It's written in open software. It's not influenced by central government. The financial transactions, decisions, and actions are recorded, and the program rules are maintained on the blockchain. They cannot be rewritten or subverted or destroyed or taken advantage of, because there is a decentralized body that controls what's in the blockchain. And once those rules are written, like what we're talking about, the 51% attack, you'd have to own more than half of the network to rewrite those rules, right? So that's your mitigating controls. The DAOs are organized to run without human interactions or without human managerial interactivity. So we don't need the managers to get involved in the decision-making process. Once certain information is received, transactions and actions are executed, somebody gets instructions on what they need to do. So if the smart contracts are supported by a Turing complete platform, which is a platform that encompasses all the activities and decisions that need to be made based on the inputs, then we don't need human interactions. We don't need input by managers.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So quick question. There are a lot of talk that government wants to take over control of the decentralized networks, organizations, and cryptocurrency as a whole. They have obviously a lot of money. I mean, our money, technically. Right?
Governments?
Yeah, governments. They have all the money. Let's put it this way. They can print whatever. So they can buy enough compute to overcome that 51%. How realistic is that?
Okay, so that's a good question. So on a proof off-work network, it might be possible because you could buy and produce enough machines to overpower the rest of the network. So let's say there's 1 million mining rigs that are mining Bitcoin. If you add 1,000,001 of the same power, same capability, then you can start rewriting or the ledger or creating double spend attacks, right? But with Cardano, for instance, 72% of ADA is already staked. So you have to buy it on an open market. So how do you do that when more than half of the supply is staked? The price would have to go high enough in order for people to move their stakeholders to move their stake out of their wallets and go sell it. And as soon as you start buying it on open market, the price goes even higher. Because at each point in the price, there are more sellers, but some are diehards that will either never sell or the price has to be ridiculously high. So proof of stake makes that extremely, extremely improbable, right? Because at some point, even if the government tries to go and produce enough money, the amount of fiat money, like dollars or euros that you throw at this will not matter anymore. Does that make sense? So with Bitcoin and Ethereum today, that may happen, although it would be very difficult. But with proof of stake, like Cardano blockchains, the probability of that is slim to none, because you'd have to, again, own more than half of this.
Right? Good question, though. So what's under the hood of the Cardano DAO, and what elements of the platform can be useful in the DAO? So there's a governance aspect of the platform. The platform manages itself, and everything runs on it based on a set of rules. Those rules are voted on by users and stakeholders. So something like CIP, Cardano improvement proposals, those are proposals that are brought forward by the owners, by the stakeholders. I'm sorry, is there a question? Okay. Okay, so they bring forward the proposal, there's a vote that happens on it. And if the majority votes for it, then the proposal is adopted. There's also a treasury and a platform for proposals for projects to be funded called the Catalyst. So if you're a member of the community, you can bring forward and submit proposal for a project to be funded by the Catalyst, and members vote on it. That's another aspect of governance. Smart contracts are contracts like legal contracts that are written on the blockchain, and when certain conditions are met, they're executed, and we'll cover what type of contracts those can be. Counterparty risk. So in the regular world today, what's counterparty risk? You make a contract with a plumber to go and fix your toilet. You give them, you sign the contract, maybe you give them some deposit, maybe you agree on a date. What if they don't show up? That's a counterparty risk. What happens to your deposit? Well, now you have to take them to court if they never show up to get your deposit back, right? If your contract was on a smart contracts platform, then those conditions would be written into the smart contract, and it would say the plumber has to show up on this date at this time between these 2 hours. You provide a deposit for their work so that you know that you actually have at least some of the money. If they don't show up, then maybe you get the deposit back. Or maybe you could even write in the smart contracts that if they don't show up, then they have to pay a penalty. So there's a reduction of the counterparty risk on the smart contract platform. Automated execution. You write the rules, you write the conditions, the two parties agree to these conditions. Conditions are written into the smart contracts platform. When the conditions are met, there's an automated execution. It could also be something like an escrow, as we know it in the common world. Once today on an escrow platform, you put up an escrow to purchase a house. Maybe you have a purchase and sale agreement. When certain conditions are met, then the escrow goes to the seller, right? So you could do that on a smart contracts platform. It could be more efficient. It could be faster. It could eliminate the need for expensive lawyers. System of truth. It's impossible to change a record once it's written into the platform. And that matters in many cases. For example, land records. In some countries, there aren't land records, or they're old, or they're written on the paper, and somebody could go back to a town office and rewrite where your property line is or where it ends to give your neighbor more land than they actually have. And then they could call the surveyor and say, actually, my property line is not here, it's 50 yards the other way, and to give them more land, right? So that's a problem in many countries right now, because land records could be corrupted. So Cardano solves that problem. Elimination of lag. It takes time for paper records to be recorded. Even if they're on the computer, even if they're digitized, land records, deeds, it takes, how long does it take to close in your mortgage? 45 days to a month? Why? Because a lot of those things have to go through people, and people have to conduct some activities. If there are platforms out there that, or applications out there that are working on Cardano-based lending, mortgages, land records, to reduce that lag. Message purity. You send a message through your distributed organization on Cardano, and that message gets in its pure form to every member and every participant. And elimination of corruption, like we mentioned, it's impossible to change the conditions or outcomes to benefit into somebody's favor because of immutability of records. So this is how you can build a distributed autonomous organization on Cardano.
Questions? Go ahead. Yes.
Your land example.
Yeah.
You have land you own, people own. All of a sudden, there's this wave of coming. It says the government owns all that land. What happens on all these contracts, and how does that deal with that condition?
So we call that eminent domain, right?
Yep.
The government comes in and says, we're going to build a tunnel right through your property, and it's a road to nowhere. But now we're going to own your land.
Yep.
So it's not a problem that a blockchain can solve, right? Because there's already a legal structure around it, and you have to take the traditional measures. You can fight them in court. You can go all the way up to the Supreme Court if you have to. But typically, the government wins in eminent domain cases, but they have to fairly compensate the landowners, right? So blockchain will not solve that problem. It's only there for the record keeping and the purity of record as far as who owns that land, right? So it will solve the problem of, if the government declares eminent domain and says, I'm going to pay each owner $1 million per acre. So the blockchain record will help you solve the problem of you own 5 acres and you get 5 million versus your neighbor owns 3 and he gets 3 million. So it solves that issue. It doesn't solve the issue of the government coming in and saying, all this is mine. So the eminent domain issue will still remain.
Yeah.
So smart contracts, what are they? How do they help us? Initially defined by Nick Szabo as a computerized transaction that's executed based on terms of a contract. So take any legal contract and you can write it out in terms on the blockchain and say, when certain conditions are met, then these actions can be executed. Smart contracts have had judicial review in many courts, not all courts, but there are legal precedents, and courts will typically recognize them as legally binding and enforceable as any other contract. So uses and use cases for smart contracts. And some of these we've mentioned. Immutable records, so records that cannot be changed once written. Financial contracts, supply chain management, mortgages, real estate market, buy and sell. Employment arrangements, that's a big one. How long does it take to hire somebody? How has anyone ever applied for a job and then it just goes for weeks and weeks and you never hear back? We're gonna solve that problem. Luxury goods tracing. You purchase a watch and a few years later you find out that it's a fake. So Cardano will solve that problem and has already solved that problem. Personal identity. So Cardano in Africa will be creating IDs, digital IDs for millions of people. That's already in progress. Escrow service, we mentioned that today. Buy and sell, put something in escrow. Birth certificate, maybe we could finally get Obama's birth certificate once it gets digitized on Cardano blockchain. Internet of Things, so that's devices connected to the internet. Educational records and records verification. Not such a big problem in the United States, but in other countries, you could go and buy a diploma somewhere on the street near a metro station, and they'll have your name put on everything. So Cardano has a memorandum of understanding with the country of Georgia government to digitize all of their educational records on the Cardano blockchain. So that's coming.
Georgia?
Country of Georgia. Country. Yes.
That's a lot process.
Copyright protection. Healthcare services. Maybe we can make healthcare more affordable by making it faster and making the records more available and traceable. Voting. How about that problem? Wouldn't we want to have a more transparent voting outcome in the 2020 election and give people more trust in their voting system? So Cardano solves the problem of voting because we vote on proposals and we vote on funding all the time. I have an app in my phone, and when there's a round of proposals out, I can reach for proposals and vote by clicking a button. And it's immutable, and it's recorded on a blockchain, and it's fast, and I can participate on my phone, and my identity is verified on my phone. Insurance claims. So insurance industry will hugely benefit from smart contracts, because right now, many records are still paper, and the ones that are digital.
Somebody hit my car in this was 2018. Was like December 2018. It took 2 years to figure out whose fault it was, and for her insurance company to reimburse my insurance company. 2 years. If that was written on the blockchain, it could have gone a lot quicker. But the two insurance companies have certain procedures that they have to follow, and everything takes a certain amount of time. And they're only yeah.
And plus, they have no interest in reimburse anybody because that's their money. They don't want to spend those money either. So.
Yeah, there was no injuries. Everybody was fine. Everybody was. There was not an injury. It was quickly apparent whose fault it was. Just the two insurance companies. My insurance company couldn't figure out what her insurance company. When they did figure it out, they didn't know where to subrogate it to, even though they had the license plate and everything. It just, with the insurance business, everything takes forever. So we'll solve that problem. So reserves and payouts and staking rewards in Cardano. Why does this matter? You can build any blockchain, unless you can exchange value, it's going to have a very difficult time surviving. Why? Because in order for you to build a distributed platform, there has to be an incentive for it to be distributed. There has to be an incentive for the operators to keep the blockchain running. Why did Bitcoin succeed? How many other distributed ledger and cryptocurrency platforms were there prior to Bitcoin? There were a few. eCash was one of them. Did not succeed. CoinShares did not succeed. If you go back to 2010 and look at the market cap of 10 biggest projects at that time, now Ripple was around, and Ethereum wasn't around, Cardano wasn't around, but Bitcoin was around, and there were a dozen other ones that were around, but they're not here today. Because they couldn't properly monetize the operation of the blockchain. They couldn't extract value. If you can't extract value, you can't keep the system running, because you have to keep paying people to run the upgrades, maintain the servers, maintain the network. So that's why there has to be some value on the blockchain. There has to be some value exchange. There has to be some incentivized operation. And Cardano does that by paying rewards to stakeholders. So how does that work, and where do they come from? Where does any money come from? Where does the US dollar come from?
Thin air.
From where?
Thin air. Air. Thin air. From nowhere.
Nowhere.
Okay, I like that.
Federalism.
Vapor.
Printer.
So dollars were finite at some point, right? So how did that work? We had the gold standard before the 1930s. Then U.S. Congress said, you don't have to back the dollar by gold anymore. But why was it backed by gold? Because we wanted to have a finite amount, right? We wanted to back each dollar by some amount of gold so that we could only have enough dollars for the amount of gold that we had. And many countries, not only the United States, on their money, it was written, you can bring this note to the bank and they will actually give you gold, right, in return. And this was the case for many countries for many years prior to 1930s and 40s and 50s. So the pound sterling was £1 because you could go to the bank and say, with this pound sterling, give me one pound of silver. That's why it was called pound sterling. Not today. So today we don't have a finite amount for the dollar or for the pound or for the euro. The government decides we need $3.5 trillion for infrastructure. We want to spend $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. So they create it out of thin air. So bing, bing, bing. Your answer was correct. Not the case with Cardano, not the case with Bitcoin. There's a finite supply. So there's a 45 billion ADA that will ever exist right now in circulation that's available right now, 32 billion. The rest, around 13 billion, are in the reserves.
You as a stakeholder receive a payout. There's a block reward. Your stake that you're delegating to produces a block. That block, when it's produced at the end of the epoch, the delegators and the pool gets a reward for minting that block. Those rewards come from two places: reserves, about 75%, and transaction fees. So from the 13 billion that are in reserves, there's a payout happening. We multiply that by 0.003 every epoch, and that becomes your epoch payout. We combine that with the transaction fees, and that's your block rewards. And from that block reward, 75% goes to stake pools and delegators, 25% goes to the treasury for governance purposes to fund projects and fund development.
About rewards.
What you said, treasury, like U.S. Treasury, or what kind of treasury?
There's a Cardano treasury.
Okay.
And the Cardano treasury is used to fund projects built on Cardano, or fund initiatives or fund proposals.
Could the government take control of that?
Well, I don't know how they would, because it's secured on a blockchain, it's distributed, it's secured on a blockchain. I guess that ADA is stored somewhere because there is a wallet for it. I think the government would have a hard time doing that. I don't know why they would want to.
Oh, there's questions. Something about
Why is there a limit of 45 billion?
Why is there 45 billion? So somebody asked that question to Charles Hoskins in one of his AMAs, and he said that 45 billion and one would be too much, and one less would be too few.
So this is what the reserves look like, and this is what the payouts look like. So 3.3 billion in rewards will be distributed this year, 2021. In 2022, 2.1. In 2023, 1.7. And this number keeps shrinking. So each year, a fewer amount of rewards will be distributed. So this is scarcity. This is what scarcity looks like. There are more people that are joining the platform. There are more participants, but there is less being added to circulation out of the reserves. What do you think that will do to the price?
Maybe,
I'm sorry?
maybe increase.
Maybe. I'm not financial advisor, so I can't tell you. But 1 year ago, one ADA was, I think, 15 cents, 18 cents. Today it's $1.20. Why does that happen? More participants. ADA is staked. 72% of ADA is staked. Every 5 days, the supply is reduced. So with Bitcoin, there's a halvening, as they call it, a halving that happens every 4 years. To counter Moore's law, and somebody tell us what Moore's law is.
Computational power increases by double every 18 months.
Aha! Somebody will get a good grade in this class, I think. So yes, every 2 years or around every 18 months, the computational power doubles. So to counter that, Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever that was, the creator of Bitcoin, built in a halving event every 4 years into the Bitcoin halving rewards. They get half, so cut in half every 4 years. That's where halving comes from. So in Cardano, that halving happens every 5 days, every epoch, except for it's not cut by half. It's reduced by a little bit because you multiply the reserves by 0.003, and that's your epoch payout. So the reserves are reduced by that amount, and then 5 days later, you do that multiplication again, and then 5 days later, you do that multiplication again, and that's why you see this. That's why the reserves are dwindling every year going forward, and that's why the payouts will be reduced. So how can you maintain running a stable operation?
Jack, your transaction fees on
Ah, that's an interesting
it. But nobody wants to buy it.
proposal. That's an interesting proposal. So
Get
what?
Get too high and then nobody's gonna even use it. So interesting problem.
So I think that the transaction fees will go up. So right now, Cardano has very cheap transaction fees, and everybody complains about Ethereum transaction fees because they're high, and Bitcoin fees because they're high. But Cardano fees are low. Eventually, there will be some increase in transaction fee cost, yes, but it will happen over a long period of time. And based on what we know historically, we as stable operators, we pay our living expenses in fiat currencies for now, and we pay for our equipment, maintenance, electricity, manpower. We still pay for that in fiat, and as the value of ADA in fiat increases, even though we'll receive less money in rewards in ADA terms, it's going to be worth more in fiat currency terms. So that's how we will keep going. But it is quite possible that transaction fees will go up, depending on how many users on the platform there will be. That's a dynamic, to a degree, it's a dynamic transaction cost basis, and it's based on number of participants and number of transactions on the blockchain at any given time.
About question.
Yeah.
So rewards by year. Looks like at 2050 all the reserve or rewards will be deployed, and there is no reserve anymore. Is that how we read the chart?
I think it's somewhere around the year 2130.
So all money, all ADA will be deployed.
Yeah, from the reserves, yes. 21.
It's over 100 years from now, right?
But this will also be based on the number of transactions. If there are more transactions, we'll be depleting reserves faster. But then if there are more transactions, then the algorithmically transaction fees will increase. Because there has to be an equilibrium between the demand on the network and supply of resources. And
the demand proposition, yeah.
exactly. So this is a smart system that will balance itself out based on demand and supply.
38% had blocks and stake. So that means that 62% either didn't have stake or didn't make blocks. But that changes every epoch. So you have to keep your system going to keep participating in the lottery and maintain it and have the latest version of the software in order for you to keep participating in the lottery and having a chance in making a block. So 94% have stake and rewards. And 38% have stake and blocks. So there's some pools that don't have stake and they don't have rewards. There are some that have stake, but they don't have rewards. But that's in that epoch. In 5 days, there will be next epoch. And as long as they're participating, then they have a next chance in the next epoch to produce a block again. So for stake pool operators, for transaction validators, the name of the game is consistency. You have to consistently operate on the network to have a chance to make the block. And when you make a block, you receive rewards.
If they just decommission your system and shut the data center down, what happens? They don't get any more transaction fees, but they still have their stake, right?
Well, the stake is there's some stake called there's some stake that belongs to the pool, right? So the pools have their pledge. The pledge is the pool's stake. And a pledge is something that I, as a stake pool operator, pledge, and I promise to keep in my pool in order to keep it running. And then there is stake by delegators. And you bring up a good point. There's always some percentage of ADA that's in a pool that's been decommissioned. There's like 8% of all ADA. Yeah. Well, because people, they delegate and then they forget, they don't check, they don't look, and they just sits in the pool that's no longer around. So at some point, IOHK, which is the company behind Cardano, as well as the Cardano Foundation, they were running their own stake pools. And then with time, they decommissioned their own to let the community run the stake pool operation. But there are still delegators that are delegating to the old pools that are no longer running. Why? You have to call them to ask them. Some more on this. 10% of delegators have never received the reward payment because they were in the stake pool that never got a block. A lot of the smaller pools don't get the blocks. In epoch 291, previous epoch, 1,801 stake pools had no block. So more than half of the pools didn't get rewards. But this will change in the next epoch. So stake pools that didn't get the rewards in the previous epoch, on the next epoch they may. Because they keep, as long as they keep participating in the transaction validations and they keep participating in the slottery process, then they keep participating in a chance to mint the block and receive rewards. Go ahead with your question.
So in the future, if there are more blocks in the pool, does that increases the stake rewards or increases?
If there is more ADA in the pool, it increases the chance of participating in the slottery, which increases the chance of minting a block. The more ADA you have in the pool, the more of a chance you have in participating in this slottery process. And if you every time you participate in the slottery process, if you're a slot leader, then you're creating the block. If you created the block successfully and propagated through the network in time, then you mint the block, and delegators to the pool are paid the rewards based on the amount of their stake.
Okay, but what if there are more, like in your previous slide you mentioned that with more users getting added to the stake, basically more users creating their own EDA and putting them into the stake pool, this will in turn make a problem in the first round.
So
Instead of 10%, that would be 50% in the near future, because more number of EDAs are in the pool which are not able to get rewarded.
So, right, so how would that work? Well, the answer to that is simple. That ADA, there's a finite amount of it. If they're adding it to one pool, it means that they've taken it from another pool, or they've purchased it from somebody, right? So you bring up a good point, and this is why I tell people all the time, if you own ADA and you don't stake it, somebody else is receiving your reward. So you're right that you can add more ADA and receive more rewards, but that would mean that the rewards that are paid out in that epoch are distributed among more people. So let's say there are 10 delegators, 6 are in one pool, 4 in the other. Then one of the ones that has 6 moves to the one that had 4, now it has 5. Now they have approximately equal amount, right? So whatever is paid out in rewards will be equally paid out among them. So there is not more ADA created just because somebody joins a pool.
Is the transaction fee paid in that same respect? Can each one say, I want a higher transaction fee? Can you control your own transaction fee, or is it basically by the?
You cannot. You cannot.
Cardano
It's,
sets that, right?
no, it's controlled by the blockchain.
Okay.
And it fluctuates. There is some fluctuation. Sometimes you try to run a transaction and you'll get back a response saying you're not offering enough money because the transaction fee is raised based on the amount of traffic that's there. Now, this is on Cardano. There are other blockchains where you can offer a higher transaction fee in order to have your transaction sent through. Ethereum is known for this, where they'll give you a choice. You can pay this much for slow, you can pay this much for faster, and if you want it really fast, then you pay this much. So on Ethereum, you can do that, but on Cardano, right now, to my knowledge, you cannot.
What about algos? Are they the same deal as Ethereum, or?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. So 172 stake pools don't have a stake. So why do they exist? I don't know. Because if you don't have a stake, you'll never get a block.
They have no ADA stake to them.
They might be in development or something, right?
It could be developers, they could be just running relays just to support the community.
Yeah.
But in order for you to have a chance to mint the block, you have to have stake and you have to participate in this lottery. Now, this is one of the aspects of delegated proof of stake is you have to keep your stake pool running for a long period of time because you average out. So, in the previous epoch, the one that just ended yesterday, we had 1 block. And 2 epochs prior to that, in each one we had 4. And then 3 epochs ago, we had 11 blocks. So if you're jumping in and out, you're staking, you're not staking, you're gonna miss the epoch where your pool will win the lottery and get the blocks, right? But if you want consistent rewards, you gotta stake over a long period of time. And this incentivizes people to stake. Now, your stake in ADA is never locked up. There is no locking period. So you can put ADA in your wallet, transfer it to your wallet, you can stake, and then you can take it out, move it to exchange, and sell it. But every 5 days, there is a snapshot that's being taken. And you get rewards based on that snapshot and the blocks produced by your pool. And the fact that you have to stake for a long period of time to get rewards is the reason why you should be staking consistently over a longer period of time. And you will have an average annualized return that's close to the inflation rate. So ADA has an inflation rate of 2.5% right now. All right, enough of that. We're heading towards kind of the end where everything is going to come together in my presentation, and you will understand why there are so many different subjects covered here. Who do you trust? No one? This is a smart man.
Wow,
right
you're
here.
optimistic.
Americans are worried about the declining level of trust. 79% of Americans don't trust each other. However, 70% think that it makes their life difficult. 64% believe that our trust in each other has been shrinking over time. 58% would like to see the trust between us improved or increased in some way. And a quarter of us think that it's a really big problem we need to address right now.
Question,
Yes.
who was that snapshot?
Pew Research Center,
2018.
2008.
I wonder what the rate change in that chart looks like.
I'd like to know. So a Gallup poll was taken on this, and this was also in 2018. It takes time for this information to come back. The most trusted organization in the United States is the US military. 74% of people trust the military. This was 2 years ago. I don't know about now, but 67% trust small businesses, 54% trust the police. That may have changed as well. 38% trust religious organizations such as their church. 37 trust Supreme Court and the presidents. I don't know if that's different now. 36% trust the medical system. 30% trust banks. 29% trust public schools. 26% trust organized labor unions. Big business is trusted by only 25% of people. 23% of people trust the newspapers. 22% trust the criminal justice system. 20% trust the television news. No wonder why nobody watches CNN or Fox or those outfits anymore. And only 11 people trust Congress. So the most untrusted organization in the United States is the US Congress.
So is anyone surprised by this number, by these numbers? Do these numbers surprise anyone?
Yep, it does surprise me about the police. 54%, that's too high.
Well, this is before, the
Yeah.
that. This is before that.
And newspaper, 20% still. What's the newspaper? Nobody reads that anymore.
I mean, there is digital, media. I mean, I don't read newspapers. I don't know about you. But I think it's kind of interesting, the lack of trust in everything, pretty much, right? It's like the
Slow
trust.
down, slow down.
The level of trust is going down, and the organizations and authorities that we should be trusting, like the legal system and the criminal justice system and the Congress, And the presidency, the authorities we should be trusting, we don't trust them. Or Americans don't trust them. It might,
I wonder what that looks like in other countries. Not about the same?
But how is it even possible? Because we select those entities, if you will, and we don't trust what we selected? It doesn't make any sense for me, you know what I mean? If I'm going to vote for somebody, which I'm not going to trust in the long run,
have you looked lately who's running for elected office?
oh,
Do you see a lot of normal people running for elected office? Do you see presidential candidates that you would actually want to vote for?
no suitable candidates I have seen so far.
Right. It's mostly I'm voting against this person or I'm voting against that person. It's mostly who do you vote against, not who do you vote for. When was the last time somebody said, I really like this candidate, I'm going to vote for him?
2018.
So what about forms of government? What form of government do we have here in the United States? Do we have communism? Okay. So there's actually, communism is like a combination of totalitarianism and oligarchy. United States could be more like a direct democracy, but we have some attributes of republic because we don't directly vote for the president, right? We have the electoral college, right? But in the older days, if we go back hundreds of years, it was more like anarchy, right? We had despotism and anarchy, and then we had monarchy. So with the monarchy, there's one person in charge and there are quick decisions. If you go back to like the pyramids, you know, it's like the czar or the monarch, the king, you know, he was the judge, he wrote the laws, he made the decisions. If there was a dispute, then, you know, if you were high enough in the hierarchy where you go to the king and say, I have a dispute with this person or that person, you know, solve it for us. And the king would say, you are correct and you are right in your dispute and you go get your head cut off. You know? So that's what the monarchy was like. And in the oligarchy, it's a select group of people that make decisions. They're less likely to be corrupted, but they may not agree. Like in the Soviet Union, it was the Politburo, right? It was the oligarchy of that time, the Politburo. They would make the decisions and they would execute them, and they would be the total authority of in Soviet Russia, right? So that's your oligarchy. But if there was a bad group of rulers, then they would take advantage of people and they would circumvent power. So in each type of the government structure, there could be something good, right? In totalitarianism, it's decisiveness. In North Korea, whatever Kim says, you know, it's decided right there and then. There is no distortion of message. But regular people have no say. And he can take anything away from anybody. So how do you kind of solve one problem without creating another one? How do you have decisiveness in the form of government? And how do you have quick decision making without making people's life miserable and taking away their property? Blockchain? Maybe it's the blockchain. Maybe it's artificial intelligence. So why do governments exist?
Draw anything you want on this page. Why do governments exist?
Regulation.
I'm sorry?
Regulation.
Regulation, okay, so why do we need to be regulated?
Not everyone is safe.
We want to keep people safe, okay, that's what they say. You give up a little bit of your freedom and then we'll keep you safe.
To serve the people of the country where government is.
Serve the people.
It's supposed to be.
Anybody on the call, anybody who is remote has any suggestions? Can we even hear people that are remote?
Are you sound?
There's somebody in the chat. Can somebody read out what's in the chat? Folks, if you're remote and you want to say something, please put it in the chat.
They raise their hand?
Can they raise their hand? There's something in the chat. Can somebody read out what's in the chat?
I can do it. Nope, no participation whatsoever.
Is anybody still there on the other line?
Yeah, it's too late. Yeah, look at that.
All right.
What does it say?
The lives of a country and the citizens of that other country. That's how it
Say it again.
It disappeared.
Put in the chat. It says something like that.
To monitor inter-country relations. Okay. So monitor people.
So here are my answers. Provide parameters for everyday behavior for citizens. So we have to kind of regulate, like you were saying, what people can and cannot do, because otherwise people just go crazy and they do whatever they want. So we have to kind of provide some parameters for them of what they should do or can do or cannot do. This is why we have the criminal justice system. This is why we have laws, right? And there's some benefit to it. Depending on what kind of society you want to live in. If you want to live in the Mad Max era where anything goes, then maybe this is not for you. To protect individuals from outside interference, like someone said in the online participants, and provide for their well-being, okay? Improve well-being and happiness. That may be the case, some people still have pensions, some still have government benefits, healthcare and things like that. Okay, I take that. Control aspects of the economy or some aspects of the economy. So in some societies that's acceptable and in other societies that's not acceptable. In some societies, the government is the economy. And unfortunately, the United States is heading more and more in that direction. Why do you need an economy if you can just print an infinite number of dollars? But then there are other countries where that problem is even more severe. If you go to North Korea, then the economy of that country is controlled 100% by the government. At least in the capitalist world, there are some guardrails and there are some rules and laws, and there are things like the interest rate basis points guidance and or overnight lending to the banks and things like that. So in different governments, there is a different aspect and there's a different level of control of the economy and to provide security and defense. Now, who are we defending ourselves from?
Each other governments, other countries, the alien invasions, the zombie apocalypse?
All the above.
All of the above? Okay.
Survival.
Now, so this is interesting. If we go back, so how far back do we go? How far back does human civilization go? Like, when did we become actually aware enough that we need to be protected from something?
Fire.
I'm sorry?
After we found how to use the fire.
After we started to use we started to use tools. Before we would just slap each other, but then we figure out how to tie a rock to a stick and hit somebody else with it. So then we needed protection from that person. So what happened is, that's pretty accurate. Once we started to live between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago, once we started to live in a society, there became a need to protect parts of society from other parts of society, or some individuals from other individuals. And what would happen is, one individual would be stronger, another individual would be weaker. One individual would be healthier or older or younger, and they'd be stronger than somebody else. But you could have multiple people gang up together on somebody else who's stronger or older or younger or more capable, and then be able to defend themselves from that person. And that's how we started with police forces and armies. We started this organized defense from somebody else. But as our society progresses, we don't really need that anymore. Or we need that less than we have needed that before, because we become more organized. So maybe as we become more organized, this need for security and defense will subside. And if we can organize some rules around that, some say that this is what United Nations is for. And before United Nations, we had the League of Nations that led to the Versailles Treaty and World War II. So we've had attempts in the past history to create some rules based on which we live to defend each other or ourselves. So maybe if we build better rules, then we won't need the armies, we won't need the nuclear weapons. Just a thought. So how can we integrate blockchain and AI, and how would that synergy look like? Or if we created a government based on blockchain and AI, what would that look like?
We could have a world with a single decision-making, super intelligent machine with the highest level of control. So this super intelligent machine would be based on computer software. But where would that software live? Where does AI live? This is a class about AI. So when you guys think about AI, where does that AI live? Who controls computers where that AI lives? And how do they use it? Maybe it's DeepMind, the Deep Blue, maybe it's Google. But do we actually want like a commercial entity to control AI with the, right? That's kind of freaky, right? Google is enough in our lives as it is. So if we give them AI and insight into our lives and we give them some governance, then would that be really fair to the rest of the society? I think not. That's why I think if you build code for artificial intelligence and you put it on a blockchain, I think that's a much better deal than having a commercial entity control that. So this super intelligent being, this single entity, it could use surveillance, it could use mind control techniques on humans, it could use robotics or other forms of artificial intelligence to rule humans. So if we give that much power to some computerized being, that entity, that code, then we probably want that code and that software to be what? Okay, immutable, distributed. Do we want it to be open source or closed source? It depends. I want to hear that one.
Well, we don't want it to give up all the secrets how it does, but also don't want to hide the things how it actually does. So you want to kind of see it in transparent, or you want exposure of everything to everyone.
Okay. So maybe some aspects of that computer code you want it to be transparent and open, right?
What is monitoring? And I don't care how, but what is monitoring, right? So what versus how that's coming.
And that could be the case. And maybe if two parties create a contract and they put it on a blockchain, maybe there's some artificial intelligence aspect to learning what's actually going on between the two parties, right? Which conditions are being violated, which conditions are being agreed to. Maybe there are some aspects of that contract that should be held closely between the parties, and maybe there are some that should be public. So we need a system that's flexible enough to have the guardrails, but at the same time, maybe expose the rules under which it operates so that we have some assurances that any artificial intelligence or decision-making that's built into that software will not be harmful to humans. Maybe something like that. Or bias, yeah. So this entity could help us solve some, most, or maybe all of human problems, cure diseases, or it could destroy us, like in Judgment Day, it could take over the nuclear missiles and shoot them at ourselves. So we have to determine what's the level of that risk and how do we use that technology to prevent human annihilation and use that computational power and that capability in a positive way, right? Could a blockchain help solve us this problem? Blockchain like Cardano, could it help us build some guardrails and some conditions into the next form of artificial intelligence or the next form of government that has an AI aspect to it to prevent some undesirable consequence? I think it can.
Bitcoin and Cardano nodes in Germany than in the United States. Unfortunately, the United States accounts for about 10% of blockchain activity. About 90% are elsewhere in the world. And that's unfortunate because this country was on the forefront of the internet. You know, the internet of 80s and 90s
Yeah.
was born here in the United States, in California, in MIT, in Harvard, in Berkeley, in Caltech. But due to the regulations and due to the restrictions in funding of projects and enforcement of regulations,
I can speak to it. I think that with the regulations, particularly with regard to the just the Wi-Fi, the bands that are available, you put so many restrictions that you couldn't even build or you couldn't even knock out a patent or build anything because there were so many restrictions and the costs were just, you didn't even know what you could buy it for. The government was controlling those bands and how they could be auctioned. It's just, I think the regulations maybe, but you know, you think about Germany, you were just mentioning they're at the top of the heap, and they've got more regulations than we have.
well, interestingly, in Germany, you can spend your Bitcoin and not pay tax on it. So you don't have to get taxed when you buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin. In Portugal, none of your earnings from crypto or blockchain are taxed whatsoever. So a blockchain company can go to Portugal, open up shop there, and they're not taxed at all.
Well,
Here, it's equivalent to regular income. Excuse me. So there are many countries out there that are more, from a tax and securities perspective, more favorable.
Crypto friendly.
More crypto friendly, yeah. And
why doesn't like Italy flip it around and do the same deal?
Isn't allowed to speak about Italy.
Oh.
yeah,
Because of the parking ticket.
Oh.
yeah, I got a parking ticket in Italy that's still unpaid.
Right, those guys are gonna make it big. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I'll come home one day and I'll find a horse's head in my bed.
But we also, if you talk about the Germany, like it has a highest tax rate, right, for on so income, so that would be around like 40 to 45%. So if you have the game working, we will be losing other thing, right? So let's say we are having no tax on the Bitcoin trading or something, but on the contrary, we have like a taxation of 40 to 50%. That's a humongous rate.
So there are higher taxes, but on income, but there are some proceeds from cryptocurrencies that are not taxed as income. Because you know the IRS here considers cryptocurrency as property. It doesn't consider it as currency. But there are other countries that they consider it as currency. So with property, if you sell it or you get it, you pay income tax and property tax. In other countries that might not be the case because there's a different tax treatment. And here, the government sees everything as a security, or most things as security. They don't see Bitcoin and Ethereum as a security because they're highly decentralized and there's no one central authority. But for example, Ripple, they've been in court for a year now with a lawsuit, SEC suing them because the Ripple, the company, they control more than certain percentage. I think it's like 40% of XRP. So it's highly centralized. So when you're launching a crypto project or a blockchain project, you as a founder, you're thinking several times, what's the best place for me to run my company and register my company and hire people? What's the most favorable place? And in the 80s and 90s, that was Massachusetts or the Silicon Valley in the United States, because you could create some capital gains here and not have to pay tax on it before you sold some stock, in a public offering. That was the advantage. And that's why Europe really missed the boat with that in the 80s and 90s. They missed the boat with the internet because they were so heavily regulated. Like in the 90s, you couldn't use a voice over IP solution in France because you were competing with the telephone companies and the government didn't like that. And the telephone companies tried to regulate that here and they weren't able to, thankfully. So that propelled the United States as a leader in the software development in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s with the .com boom and all that, e-commerce. But we really need to ask our government to have a hard look at the blockchain space and catch up with the rest of the world. Like if China doesn't have it, that's fine. If they don't want it, that's fine. Well, we should, because it's the future. On one hand, there is some competition with the government because the government and those who are in the government, many politicians understand that blockchain-driven cryptocurrencies have scarcity to them. Bitcoin has scarcity. Ethereum has some scarcity. It's not clear yet, but Cardano definitely has scarcity.
Scarcity, you say?
Yes.
What does that mean in terms of,
You can never have more than 21 million Bitcoin. You can never have more than 45 billion ADA.
Got it.
There's some finite supply.
We can print money, we just can't print Bitcoin. It goes only
Right.
goes to 45 and it stops.
You have a cap.
Yeah. Okay.
Questions, comments, concerns?
Check out our website, stakemyada.net. We have a page on LinkedIn. You can look for LEGA. We have a YouTube channel. We have a page on adapools.org and pooltool.io. We want to bring more people into our community. We want you, our future, the students, to participate in this movement. We want you to learn about it, read about it, tell others about it. Because the future is in your hands. You are the generation that will onboard all of us onto the blockchain and implement artificial intelligence. And if you do a good job, then you get the blockchain and artificial intelligence that helps cure diseases and go to find other habitable planets and travel through space and extend human life. But if you do a bad job, then you get the Skynet from Judgment Day, which could destroy humanity and all of us. So the future is in your hands.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here today. And those who are joining us online, thank you for spending your time. I know that there are other places where you could get your content, like Netflix and exactly. And YouTube. So thank you.